Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you are well, you amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. It's Monday. Monday, a new week. A new week, but not a new conversation. I know. You're looking absolutely amazing. You must have had a good weekend. Anyway, trigger warning. There's a trigger warning on this video. If you're someone who doesn't like to hear about injuries sustained around the Idaho 4 case, this video is not going to be for you. Needed to get that out of the way because we are going to be talking about specific injuries that were received and what that could potentially mean here, because it's something that's concerned me for quite some time. We've heard about certain injuries sustained. We had heard about certain injuries sustained for some period of time from the Gonsalves family, for instance, who, as you heard in video 1 earlier, which I don't understand. Don't understand how people can say things and then later on down the line make it sound like they didn't know anything when they absolutely did know. And look, this ain't a hate track. I'm just trying to make sense of it. They literally said and would go on to detail injuries received and then make it sound like now that all of a sudden this is the first that they're hearing of things. And look, anyway, that's by and by. Let's get on to this, because I feel that this is quite telling, and I'd like you to let me know down below what you think at the end of the video. So this is an excerpt from the autopsy report. And what it's talking about here specifically is the fatal injuries. Now, what we've got to try and do here is separate the wheat from the chaff, as obviously some of these individuals received multiple injuries. Like they're talking about Canodal had 50 stab wounds, but a lot of these were defensive. So if someone's putting their hands up, they're trying to grab, you know, it could be multiple in a short space of time as they're trying to defend themselves. But it's looking at the major injuries, the kill shot, if you like. And what we're noticing here, if you look at Ethan, right? So Ethan Chapin's fatal injury was from a stab wound under his left clavicle, which severed his subclavian vein and subclavian artery. And also his jugular vein was severed. Ethan only had sharp force injuries. Now, if we now go through here, like some of these, you'll notice again that the fatal injury is pretty similar. Like across anaconodal, you look at fatal injuries was a laceration in a right lung and 2 lacerations in a heart, which again, if you look at Madison Mogan, again, there's a consistency there. Left lung laceration, a liver laceration. And again, Madison only had sharp force injuries. Now we look at Kaylee Gonsalves, and they're near enough identical, where you look at here, you've got a stab behind her clavicle, which cut her subclavian vein and artery. Now, so look, it says here that it goes on to talk about the weapon. But what I'm saying here is you've got someone, right? Say the person who did this is Brian Koberger. Brian Koberger is the person who did it. He'd never, ever done anything like this before. So we're talking about someone who this is his maiden voyage, if you like. There's no connection to these individuals, nothing whatsoever, nothing. There's nothing in his past, in his history, that would raise any real alarm bells. They're still struggling to show. You've got somebody coming out now and saying that Brian Koberger sustained injuries that were consistent with scratch marks on his face and injuries to his knuckles. Now, I'm calling bullshit on that immediately. And the reason that I'm doing that, I feel that this is almost like someone's trying to say that these wounds are consistent with the injuries that were sustained by the victims. But I would say that if Brian Koberger had scratch marks on his face, for instance, then there would have been DNA found at the scene of the crime and under somebody's fingernails. Now, it does raise an issue with Madison Mogan because obviously there is some kind of confusion around the results of the DNA testing, with some testing would say that it was kind of inconclusive, with the defense their rebuttal being no, that Brian Koberger was excluded from that. So as it stands, from a factual point of view, we don't have Brian Koberger's DNA at the scene of the crime, except from the claim that it was found on a knife sheath found at the scene of the crime. So I don't understand why they're talking about these injuries. Where is this? This is here. Look, if I show you this, you've probably seen it, but this is talking about here. Look, convicted killer Brian Koberger was spotted with fingernail-type scratches across his face. Do you want me to make that a little bit bigger so you can actually read it? This is being reported by multiple sources. Convicted killer Brian Koberger was spotted with fingernail-type scratches across his face and wounds on his knuckles around the time that he murdered 4 Idaho students in a brutal attack, but brushed the injuries off as a car accident. A teaching assistant and fellow criminology student at Washington State University told investigators he had noticed the injuries on the 30-year-old killer's face and hands on 2 separate occasions around October and November 2022. New police records show. So look, we'll see what comes of that. Obviously, you have to question the October date there, but a bit of a fucking weird one. But no, what I'm trying to get at here is that you have a situation where you've got Brian Koberger goes in this house. We're saying that there's nothing really in his history. And there is actually reports that he wasn't great with a weapon, couldn't even fillet a fish. Again, this is something that's been said. This is something that has been reported. So it just raises the question: is how does somebody who has never done this kind of thing before go into a property that they are unfamiliar with, that they manage to get into? They don't seemingly take into consideration who can be in there. So that's not a thought. That's not a concern. That's not a worry, despite there being multiple cars out the front. And again, an unfamiliarity of who could be in there, the layout of the property. We've questioned multiple times regarding this being a student property, which when this person enters this home, do they not consider that it's a student property? You would think, well, yeah, you're absolutely going to know that it's student property. So you're going to think to yourself, I could walk in here and there could be multiple people all together, grouped around. I may have to break into individual rooms because individual rooms are more than likely going to have individual locks on them. So this individual doesn't take any of that into consideration, or they do take that into consideration. They get into the property. They're on a mission, so they go into the house and they straight away venture up to where Madison Mogen and Kaylee Gonsalves are, and this huge attack, which seems to suggest not so much multiple weapons, which is something that was, discussed earlier on in the case, but it would in fact suggest someone with a huge familiarity with the weapon that they're using. I did touch on this before, the K-bar being a military weapon. Those that were in the military would have been trained with the use of that knife, how to use it with its multiple facets. There's perhaps 3 main ways that weapon can be used in combat. One with the hilt of the handle, one with obviously the normal stab and motion, and again with the slash and motion. And this autopsy report now would seemingly suggest that this knife was used proficiently. Not only proficiently, but with accuracy. Absolute accuracy, with the fatal injuries showing a consistency across all of them. And again, it's about removing the noise, separating the wheat from the chaff, in that there is a lot of it would appear frenzied in the fact that there's a lot of defensive wounds. And there, I'm sure that there was some anguish wounds in there as well. We saw this specifically with Kaylee Gonsalves and the injuries that she sustained that we won't go into detail with on this video, but that would show again that perhaps the hilt of the knife had been used. But certainly when you look at the fatal injuries, there seems to be a consistency, a skill, a proficiency that you wouldn't rarely see in a first time rodeo of someone who is completely unfamiliar with this type of thing. You know, you would expect someone who was either a hunter, a skilled hunter, or has a good knowledge of the human anatomy and where is going to have the absolute quickest and most effective methodology of execution. That's just the feel that I get. It's just the feel that I get. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. If you're someone who has read the autopsy, what did you feel about it? And about these specific injuries, especially this consistency running through them, and again the accuracy of it. First time or not? Oh.